We honor our own. The words hung in the air as 150 uniformed veterans filled every corner of Sarah's struggling café. 24 hours earlier, she'd defended a lone retired Marine when local teens harassed him. What happened next would leave an entire town in tears. Sarah Mitchell's hands were chapped and red as she wiped down the sticky counter at Mitchell's Cafe for the third time that hour. The lunch rush, if you could call 6 customers a rush, had ended, and she was mentally calculating if today's take would cover the water bill that sat unopened in her purse. The final notice stamp had bled through the envelope. "Just a few more months," she muttered, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. It was the same empty promise she'd been making herself for 14 months now. Ever since her mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis had put her in a care facility and Sarah in charge of the family cafe. Her teaching career in the city, her apartment, her life, all put on hold for a small-town eatery that was bleeding money faster than she could bandage the wounds. The ancient ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, barely moving the humid summer air. Outside, Pineville's main street was quiet, as it always was these days since the mill had laid off half its workforce. The bank had foreclosed on 4 businesses already this year. Some days, Sarah wondered if Mitchell's Cafe would be next. The bell above the door jingled. That cheerful little sound her mother had always loved. Sarah glanced up, her breath caught instantly. A tall man dressed in a faded military jacket pushed through the doorway. His weathered face was half hidden behind a neatly trimmed white beard that looked like it had weathered 1,000 storms. Deep lines etched around his eyes told stories of both joy and hardship, but it was the Marine Corps cap on his head that seemed to make the room go still. The handful of remaining customers froze. Mrs. Wilson actually clutched her coffee mug tighter. The Johnson twins stopped mid-bite, forks hovering in the air. Even the radio seemed to hit a moment of static. The veteran seemed to feel the tension, his broad shoulders stiffening slightly as he made his way to the counter. Each careful step on the worn tile floor seemed deliberate, like a man used to measuring his movements. He deliberately chose the stool at the far end, keeping distance between himself and the other patrons. A man used to being unwelcome. Sarah could practically hear her mother's voice in her head. Everyone deserves kindness at Mitchell's. But her mother had never had to serve a man who looked like he'd seen too much war in their small, peaceful town, where rumors about those disturbed veterans circulated like gospel. Sarah steadied her hand, grabbed a laminated menu and a glass of ice water. The other waitress, Becky, had suddenly found a pressing need to refill sugar dispensers at the far end of the cafe. "Welcome to Mitchell's," Sarah said, approaching him with the same practiced smile she offered every customer. "Today's special is chicken pot pie with homemade crust, made it fresh this morning." The veteran looked up, and Sarah was struck by his eyes, deep brown and weary, like he hadn't truly rested in days. Against that hard face, those weather-beaten features, his eyes seemed to belong to another man entirely. "Coffee," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost soft. "Black as you can make it. And whatever's fastest from the kitchen. Been on the road since before dawn." As Sarah poured his coffee from the ancient percolator, she noticed his hands, strong, calloused things that seemed built for hard work. But there was a slight tremble to them as he reached for the mug. His knuckles were rough, and a thin medical alert bracelet was partially hidden beneath his jacket cuff. Behind the exhaustion in his eyes, Sarah recognized something else, a bone-deep sadness she'd seen too many times during her volunteer work at the VA hospital. It was the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Long drive ahead of you still?" she asked, keeping her voice casual, the way her mother had always chatted with strangers. His large hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was something precious, drawing warmth from the chipped ceramic. He took a long pull before answering. "Heading back to Lakeside Medical Center," he said finally, each word measured like speaking was an effort. "My grandson." Something seemed to catch in his throat. He stared down at his coffee, his grip tightening around the mug. "My grandson," he repeated, but couldn't seem to finish the thought. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not pity. This man wouldn't want pity, but a familiar ache of recognition. Not a worn-out veteran in that moment, just a worried grandfather. "I'll get that order in right away," she said, her voice softening. "Toast and eggs work? Fastest thing on the menu, 5 minutes tops." He nodded, the relief evident as his shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe it was the promise of food, or maybe just that she hadn't asked him to explain further. As Sarah turned to place the order, she felt the stares from the remaining customers. Mrs. Wilson was whispering urgently to Mrs. Henderson, their gray heads bent together like conspirators. The Johnson twins were openly watching. Becky was still finding those sugar dispensers absolutely fascinating. Small towns had long memories, and veterans with 1,000-yard stares had reputations that preceded them. 10 years ago, a troubled vet had caused a scene at Thompson's grocery after a car backfired, leaving everyone shaken. Never mind that he'd later gotten help and become a respected member of the community. In Pineville's collective memory, all haunted-looking veterans were viewed with caution. The bell jingled again, and a group of teenagers walked in. 5 boys, all wearing Pineville High Letterman jackets. They were regulars, usually loud but harmless, though Sarah had always found their ringleader Jake's swagger a bit much. They spotted the veteran immediately, and Sarah saw Jake nudge his friends. They approached the counter, deliberately taking seats near the man. Well, don't often see your type in Pineville," Jake said loudly, making no attempt to hide his amusement. "Just passing through, I hope." The veteran kept his eyes on his coffee. "Just getting some food, son." Sarah returned with a plate of eggs and toast, placing it in front of the veteran. "Anything else I can get you?" Before he could answer, Jake spoke up. "How about checking if this guy's even safe to be around, Sarah? My dad says some of these vets come back all messed up in the head." The veteran reached slowly for his fork, but Jake's friend Tyler leaned closer. "Careful now." Sarah felt her temper rising. "He's a paying customer, Jake. Just like you." "Not just like me," Jake smirked. "His kind brings trouble, PTSD and all that." "My kind." The veteran looked up for the first time, his voice still quiet but with a firmness to it. "You don't know the first thing about me, young man." Jake leaned in closer. "I know that look. My uncle works at the VA. Says half you guys are just one loud noise away from losing it." The veteran started to respond, but another teen cut him off. "Maybe we should see what happens if we drop a tray. See if he dives under the table." Several other customers were watching now, some looking uncomfortable, others just curious. The veteran put his fork down. "Look, I'm just trying to get some food before I visit my grandson at Lakeside. His voice caught slightly. "He's not doing well." "Oh, I'm sure," Jake laughed. "The old sick family member excuse. Classic." Something in Sarah snapped. Maybe it was the memory of her mother in her hospital bed. Or maybe it was just the basic human decency her parents had taught her. Either way, she'd had enough. "That's it," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You're done harassing my customers, Jake." The cafe went silent. No one spoke to Jake Miller that way, especially not about how he treated suspicious individuals. His father was on the town council, after all. "Excuse me?" Jake turned his attention to Sarah, eyes narrowing. "You heard me. He came in for a meal. He's been nothing but polite, and you're treating him like a criminal." "You don't know who you're defending, Sarah," Tyler warned. "I'm defending a customer in my cafe. And unless you have an actual reason to suspect him of something besides his military jacket, I'd appreciate if you let him eat in peace." Jake stood up, towering over Sarah. "Your mom would be real disappointed to see you taking sides against the town kids, Sarah." That was a low blow, and everyone knew it. Maria Mitchell had been beloved by generations of Pineville teenagers before her illness. "My mom taught me to judge people by how they act, not what they wear," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And right now, you're the one acting badly in my cafe." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several customers shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson, the retired librarian, suddenly became very interested in her pie. Dave Wilson, who'd gone to high school with Sarah, stared down at his coffee cup. "I think I'll take my food to go," the veteran said quietly, reaching for his wallet. "No," Sarah said firmly. "Your money's no good here today. The meal's on me." The veteran looked at her with surprise, genuine gratitude flashing across his face. Jake's face flushed deep red. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. This town has a way of remembering who its friends are." The threat wasn't subtle. In a small town like Pineville, being on the wrong side of the popular crowd could be bad for business. Sarah's hands were trembling now, but she kept her chin up. "Are you going to order something, or are you just here to intimidate my customers?" For a moment, she thought Jake might do something truly stupid. Instead, he threw a few dollars on the counter. "Lost my appetite. Let's go, guys." As they left, the bell jingling angrily behind them, conversation slowly resumed throughout the café. Sarah turned to the veteran, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry about that," she said. He shook his head slowly. "Don't be. Not many people would have done what you just did." He paused, studying her face. "Name's Frank. Frank Calloway." "Sarah Mitchell." "Thank you, Sarah Mitchell." He ate quickly after that, and when he finished, he left a $20 bill on the counter despite her protests. "For your mother," he said simply before heading out the door. Sarah tried to put the incident behind her, but the stares from the other customers told her it wouldn't be that simple. By closing time, she'd overheard enough whispered conversations to know the story was spreading through town like wildfire. That night, as she sat by her mother's bedside at the Pineville Care Center, she told her about her day, even though her mother's Alzheimer's meant she likely didn't understand. "I don't know if I did the right thing, Mom," she said. "But I couldn't just stand by." Her mother's eyes seemed to hold a moment of clarity, but maybe that was just what Sarah wanted to see. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the cafe early as usual. What wasn't usual was the "closed until further notice" sign someone had taped to her window overnight. Beneath it, scrawled in black marker, "No veteran lovers in Pineville." Sarah ripped the sign down, her hands shaking with anger. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but the message was clear enough. The breakfast rush was noticeably lighter than normal. By lunchtime, it was obvious that word had spread. The cafe that usually buzzed with conversation and clinking silverware was eerily quiet, with only a handful of regulars braving the apparent boycott. Old Mrs. Henderson came in for her usual egg salad sandwich, patting Sarah's hand sympathetically. "This will blow over, dear. Small towns have short memories when they want to." Dave Wilson and his wife came by too, deliberately sitting at the window table where they could be seen from the street. "Hell with them," Dave said louder than necessary. "Best coffee in town is still the best coffee in town." But these small gestures of support weren't enough. Sarah did the math in her head. Another week like this, and she wouldn't make rent. Around 2 o'clock, with the cafe empty, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of despair. She leaned against the counter, fighting back tears. The cafe wasn't just a business. It was her mother's legacy, the place where she'd grown up learning to count change and wipe tables. Now it might all disappear because she'd stood up for a stranger. The familiar jingle of the bell interrupted her thoughts. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes, putting on her professional smile. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, dressed in crisp slacks and a simple blouse. The only hint of a military connection was a small Marine Corps pin on her lapel. Behind her was a man about the same age, with the straight posture that screamed military background. "Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked. Sarah nodded, suddenly nervous. "I'm Eleanor Calloway, Frank's daughter." She stepped forward, extending her hand. "This is my husband, James." Sarah shook their hands, confusion evident on her face. "Dad told us what you did for him yesterday," Eleanor explained. "He would have come himself, but he's still at the hospital with Eli. That's his grandson, My son. How is he? Sarah asked. Touch and go, James replied, his face grim. Leukemia stage 3. They're trying an experimental treatment at Lakeside. Last chance kind of thing. Sarah's heart sank. I'm so sorry. Dad said you were kind to him when not many would be, Eleanor continued. Said you stood up to those kids like you'd been doing it all your life. Sarah shrugged, embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. James shook his head. No, they wouldn't. And from the looks of this place, you're paying for it now. Sarah couldn't deny it. The empty tables spoke for themselves. We wanted to thank you properly, Eleanor said. Dad said you mentioned your mother was ill. I don't need money, Sarah said quickly, her pride flaring. James held up his hands. Wouldn't dream of offering, but we thought maybe we could send some business your way. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the rumble of engines filled the air. Not just one or two, but dozens, growing louder by the second. Sarah moved to the window, her eyes widening as car after car appeared on the street outside her café. Not just cars, there were pickup trucks, SUVs, even a few motorcycles. They came from both directions, filling the street, then the parking lot, then spilling over to the vacant lot next door. There had to be at least 100 vehicles. Men and women of all ages emerged, most wearing some form of military insignia, veteran caps, service pins, unit patches. They approached in waves, some using canes, others walking tall despite prosthetic limbs visible beneath shorts. What is this? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible above the rumble of engines. James smiled. Frank reached out to the Veterans Alliance last night. Told them about a cafe owner who showed him respect when he needed it most. Word travels fast in our community. But there must be over 100 people out there. 127 by my last count, Eleanor corrected with a smile. And they've all been driving since dawn. I imagine they're pretty hungry. As if on cue, the bell jingled and the first group of veterans entered. They were polite, almost deferential, greeting Sarah with respect before taking seats. Then more came in, filling every table, lining up at the counter, standing patiently when there was nowhere left to sit. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. A tall woman with silver hair approached her. You must be Sarah. I'm Captain Rebecca Torres, retired. Served with Frank in Desert Storm. She extended a hand which Sarah shook automatically. Hope you don't mind us dropping in like this. I don't think I have enough food, Sarah admitted. Rebecca laughed. Already taken care of. Eleanor called ahead to your suppliers. Got a big delivery coming in 15 minutes. Don't worry about the cost. It's covered. Sarah looked around in disbelief as her cafe, which had been a ghost town moments before, now buzzed with life. The veterans were ordering coffee, water, whatever she had ready, all paying in cash, all leaving generous tips. I don't understand, she said to Rebecca. You did all this for me? Because of what happened with Frank? Rebecca's expression grew serious. People see our military background and think they know who we are. Most times they have these ideas about us being dangerous or broken. Frank was on his way to maybe say goodbye to his grandson, and those kids were giving him grief just because of what he represents to them. She paused, looking around the cafe. What you did, standing up for one of our brothers when it wasn't the easy thing to do, that means something to us. Outside, the rumble of engines continued as more vehicles arrived. Across the street, Sarah could see people gathering on the sidewalk, watching in amazement. She even spotted Jake's father among them, phone in hand, looking utterly bewildered. The bell above the door jingled again, and Sarah turned to see a familiar face. Frank Calloway stood in the doorway, looking tired but somehow lighter than he had the day before. Hope you don't mind me bringing a few friends, he said with the ghost of a smile. Sarah laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. I think I can squeeze them in. For the next few hours, Sarah and the 3 waitresses she managed to call in worked harder than they ever had. The delivery arrived as promised. Enough food to feed an army of hungry veterans. Every table was full, with customers rotating out so new arrivals could eat. The cash register filled and had to be emptied twice. Word spread through town, and slowly, cautiously, some of the regular customers began to appear. They stood awkwardly at first, clearly intimidated by the sea of military caps and service pins, but the veterans made room, sharing tables, striking up conversations. Mrs. Henderson ended up deep in conversation with a veteran grandmother about their shared love of quilting. Dave Wilson discovered that one of the veterans was a fellow baseball coach for the local Little League. The high school principal found himself discussing educational reform with a veteran who turned out to be a public school superintendent in the next county. By sunset, the impromptu gathering had evolved into something like a community festival. Someone had brought out a portable grill to help with the overflow cooking. Music played from car stereos. Children from the neighborhood had ventured closer, fascinated by the veterans' stories and medals. In the midst of it all, Sarah found a moment to pull Frank aside. "How's your grandson? Eli, right?" Frank's face brightened. "That's actually why I could make it today. Doctor called this morning. The treatment, it's working. Early days, but his blood counts are better." His voice caught. "First good news we've had in months." Sarah impulsively hugged him, and after a moment of surprise, he hugged her back. "He wants to meet you," Frank added when they separated. "The woman who stood up for his grandpa told him you reminded me of his mother. Tough, doesn't take any nonsense." "I'd like that," Sarah said, meaning it. As the evening wound down, Rebecca called for everyone's attention. The café fell silent, conversations pausing mid-sentence. "I want to thank Sarah Mitchell for her hospitality today," she announced, her clear voice carrying easily through the café. "And I want to make something clear to everyone in Pineville. Mitchell's Café is under the protection of the Veterans Alliance from this day forward." A cheer went up from the veterans. "Which means," Rebecca continued, "we'll be making this a regular stop on our meetings, and we'd take it as a personal affront if anyone in this town gave Miss Mitchell any trouble about who she chooses to serve in her establishment." She fixed her gaze on Jake's father, who had eventually ventured inside and was now sitting uncomfortably near the door. Mr. Miller seemed to shrink under Rebecca's stare. "Are we clear?" Rebecca asked. Miller nodded quickly. "Good," Rebecca smiled, transforming her serious face. "Now, who's ready for dessert? I hear Sarah's apple cobbler is the best in 3 counties." Another cheer, and the conversations resumed. Later that night, after the last of the veterans had departed with promises to return soon, Sarah locked up the café and counted the day's receipts. It was more money than she'd made in the past 2 weeks combined. But more than that, something had changed in the air of Pineville. She could feel it as she walked to her car. The town that had been ready to ostracize her that morning had been given a glimpse behind the military caps and service pins, had seen the humanity in people they'd been taught to fear. As Sarah drove to the care center to see her mother, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. In standing up for one stranger, she'd gained hundreds of friends. And maybe, just maybe, helped a small town expand its understanding of what it means to judge someone by how they act, not what they wear. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the café to find a package leaning against the door. Inside was a beautiful American flag in a display case with a plaque that read, "Mitchell's Café Friend of Veterans," engraved across the bottom. Pinned to it was a note in steady handwriting. "For the bravest café owner we know, Eli's doing better. He still wants to meet you. Frank." Sarah hung the flag on the wall behind the counter, right next to her mother's old apron. When Jake and his friends came in for sodas an hour later, unusually subdued and polite, Sarah served them with the same smile she gave every customer. After all, her mother had taught her to judge people by how they act, not what they wear. And sometimes it took a café full of veterans to remind a town what that really meant. It's a strange thing, how the smallest moments can change our lives. Sarah Mitchell didn't set out to be a hero that day. She just couldn't stand by while someone was being mistreated. She didn't know her simple act of decency would bring 150 veterans to her door, save her mother's legacy, and heal the divisions in a broken town. Sometimes courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic stands. Sometimes it's just about serving coffee to a stranger when everyone else turns away. And changing the world, one cup at a time. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales of everyday heroes. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for a stranger? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.